Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out here, 5 p.m. on a lovely Spokane spring afternoon. Welcome to our second Flannery Lecture in Catholic Theology this spring term. My name is John Shevland. I teach here in the Religious Studies Department, and it's my pleasure to say a few words about this lecture series and about our speaker. Our speaker today, Jesuit Father Marcel Uwineza, joins us this Tuesday evening, but his very early Wednesday morning from his office in Nairobi, Kenya, across from Lake Victoria to the east of his home country of Rwanda. While travel complications prevented him from making the long journey to our campus, we're delighted very much to be with him over Zoom. Father Uwineza's words this evening about Rwandan lives subjected to genocide give us opportunity to reflect on the dignity of persons past and present in his place and in our own place as well. The Spokane tribal people, past and present, their unceded land on which white settler colonialism wrought a genocide upon these people. And it's upon this same land that Gonzaga University and its students reside and work. We acknowledge with respect and with grief those who now remain and those who belong to a deep historical past. The Flannery Lecture is made possible by the Flannery Endowment, established in 1973 by Maud and Milo Flannery to promote the study of Catholic theology at Gonzaga University. 50 years on, tonight, we are grateful for the many ways the Flannery family continues to contribute to our university life, now over 5 decades. We have a member of the Flannery family with us tonight, as he always is. Michael Flannery and his husband, Dean Lynch, attend these events unfailingly. And it's always a pleasure to acknowledge and to thank them. So thank you, Michael and Dean, out there in your Zoom land, for your friendship, for your support of Gonzaga and of our department's work. And thank you for the gift of your great aunt and great uncle, Maud and Milo. It's because of their generous gift to the university that we are here this evening with our guest, afforded the opportunity of learning from him and sharing space with him. Marcel Uwineza is a Jesuit priest from Rwanda and recently became the principal or president of Hekima University College, which he served previously as dean. He has served as the formation assistant of the Jesuits Rwanda-Burundi region. He holds a Ph.D. in systematic theology from Boston College and is completing an MBA in leadership and management from York State St. John University in the United Kingdom. His recent book is entitled Risen from the Ashes, Theology as Autobiography. And dare I plug it for a moment here, it's available on Kindle for a mere $7, less than a burrito. His next book coming out later this year is entitled Healing a Wounded People, A Theology for a Divided World, and that will be published by Brill. And his co-edited book, also coming out later this year, I think he said just in a month or so, is entitled Reinventing Theology in Post-Genocide Rwanda, Challenges and Hopes. This will be published by Georgetown University Press very shortly. In April of 2019, Dr. Uwineza addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York during the commemoration of 25 years after the genocide against the Tutsi people in Rwanda. Dr. Uwineza was part of Georgetown University's Berkeley Center, Culture of Encounter and Catholic Social Teaching in the Global Future of Development Project. A young career, already incredibly rich. We're really delighted to be with him this evening. We're extremely grateful for the effort it takes to be with us virtually in the middle of the night there in Nairobi. And Father Marcel will speak for a bit. He has some slides to share with us as well, and then we will have some Q&A time. So I know we have a lot of students out there in the audience. Please do feel free to listen carefully and take note of any kinds of questions, clarifications that you might like to bring to Father Uwineza. So without further ado, Father Marcel, Father Uwineza, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John, for this invitation. I consider it really an honor and a privilege to be part of this lecture. And I want to thank the university for selecting me and for choosing me for this lecture. And in a special way to thank you for all the communication we have had up to this day. Challenges of travel could not allow me to come to Gonzaga. It was my my hope, but I trust I would come another day. I am also grateful to Michael and Dean, and really to the Flannery family who have made it possible for me to be part of this lecture. And to all of you following me, thank you very much for this opportunity to be together. And I have prepared some slides. I am aware that we are at different levels right now. And here it is in early morning, 3 a.m. And your place, it is in the evening, but also so to allow easy communication and for you to follow me easily, I have prepared some slides. And the topic that was chosen is Theology from a Place of Wounds, Lessons from the Mirror Church in Rwanda. Really grateful for those kind words to this humble servant, Marcel Uwineza. Thank you very much. What can we expect as we go through this lecture? I do not assume that everyone knows about Rwanda, so there will be really a very brief history of Rwanda. Then the role of the church in that history. Again, this is very brief. Then why have I chosen to call the Rwanda or the Rwandan church a mirror? Then I will look at the theological lessons from Rwanda. And from those theological lessons, we have seen the multi-layered wounds of Rwanda. It's not only one wound, there are many. And then I propose 5 perspectives on what it means to reinvent theology in post-genocide Rwanda. And then a conclusion. That's what to expect. Where are we actually? Where are we located? Rwanda is really in the East Central Africa, and this was beautifully introduced by Professor John Sheelan. He said that just across Victoria Lake, and it's a small country, 26,236 square kilometers. And a country with a lot of beauty, but a country also that has had quite a great deal of history. On the northern part of Rwanda, you have Uganda. Then on the southern part, you have Burundi. On the eastern part of Rwanda, you have Tanzania. And then on the western part of Rwanda, you have the Democratic Republic of Congo, which used to be Zaire, if you like. What do I consider to be the limitations of my presentation and the end goal of this? The limitations is that I imagine that some of you may be unfamiliar with Rwanda and its history. So a few of my presentation probably may go overhead. I beg for pardon. And it's probably an invitation for many people to read more on Rwanda. And for this, to alleviate this limitation, I would call your attention to a wonderful book by James Carney, J.J. Carney, Rwanda Before the Genocide, Catholic Politics and Ethnic Discourse in the Late Colonial Rwanda. It's a wonderful book published by an American, an Oxford book. This is a wonderful, it will be good for you to know more about Rwanda and the church in Rwanda. Some discussions will invite to do more homework on what we can learn from the Rwandan church and its vulnerability. My hope in this presentation is to do a homegrown theology. So while of course learning or leaning on the tradition of the church. As I begin, let me begin with an image. what would you choose to depict the present situation in Rwanda? Mind you, we are speaking of now almost 29 years after the genocide against the Tutsi and the war. And so what would be the image? And as I was reflecting and learning on some of my best colleagues, the images that come to my mind is the image of a cemetery and a construction site. And what do I mean by this? Moving across that tiny country, yet beautiful country, you will see a lot of graves. So many dry bones, to use the image of Ezekiel. And there are many that are yet to be discovered. There are many that are yet to come out. So that's one image. But also you see churches that have become memorial sites, cemeteries. Or you can see on my right here a church. This is in Nyamata, the Nyamata church that where more than 20,000 people were killed in 1994 during the genocide. Then across you have a new church that is being reconstructed. It's just been actually consecrated 2 years ago. A beautiful church that has now been constructed after the Nyamata church became a memorial site. You have a small picture of the city of Kigali here that is again under reconstruction after a horrific past. So two images to envision Rwanda: a cemetery and a construction site. And maybe to put it in context, let me put it this way, calling for a self-examination, and why I have taken this as a duty, should I say, to really reflect on the wounds of Rwanda. It is August 1994. This is just 1 month after the end of the genocide. And we had just finished celebrating Mass at the Cathedral of Butare. This is the southern part of Rwanda. A nervous woman raised her voice and said, "How can we continue to celebrate Mass as we did before the genocide?" I asked her the question, "How do you want it to be celebrated?" She said, "I don't know." We separated on the two questions, but for me, the disappointment of the woman and her request always haunted me as a serious questioning. But as I thought about it, I found that the answer was going to be a process of concurrent and long-term change. Now, these are not my words. They are words of a bishop who attended a conference that I co-organized. And he said, what Rwanda has gone through calls for self-examination, for reinventing ways of being church and being Christians. And I have taken this, I really, in a way, appropriate these words. How can we continue being church as we were before? As if we can't remain church in Rwanda as if nothing happened. In Rwanda, places of solace and prayer became slaughterhouses. And in one of his beautiful books, Philip Gurevich, "We wish to inform you that tomorrow will be killed." He wrote that Rwanda, what we had in Rwanda was an intimate genocide, to describe the social and the psychological proximity among perpetrators, victims, and bystanders. In Rwanda, they are not foreigners who just killed Rwandans. Rwandans killed Rwandans. At the same time, we had the genocide against the Tutsi in 94, but there was also a flow of refugees in the neighboring countries. This is one of the camps in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the then Zaire, where so many people really languished in with a lot of suffering soon after the genocide. How did this happen? So, a brief history, and inviting you to dig more. There are a lot of theories that can come out. I just bring out these few, knowing that every hypothesis may have its limitations, but there are some that have greater certainty. Favoring one group over another has been Rwanda's structural injustice for many years. the ethnic qualification for political office, reinforce the ruling class's sense of superiority, and tribal exclusiveness. This is from a book by Ian Linden, The Revolution, Catholic Revolution. And of course, at the heart of Rwanda's structural injustice were ethnic contested categories. I call them contested because the very definition of ethnicity doesn't fit Rwanda. Rwandans speak the same language, Rwandans share the same culture, Rwanda, while an ethnicity, people usually share the same ancestral heritage, this may not fit the context of Rwanda. So I usually call them contested ethnic categories. To use the word ethnicity in Rwanda is probably a misnomer. But for lack of better expression, we have still had to use it because that history has had it so. But also the functional differentiation between Hutu and Tutsi and Twa, the three contested classes or groups, in large part was an intensification of European colonialism. I call it intensification. The classes existed also before colonialism, but colonialism intensified them or made them fixed. What was previously a fluid identity prior to colonialism became a fixed identity. Prior to colonialism, people could move from one class to the other. But after colonialism, or with the advent of colonialism, ethnic identities became fixed. To give you an example, we can think of the story of the Jews. The colonizers produced a theory of ethnic superiority, placing the Twa at the bottom, the Tutsi at the top, and Hutu in between. And of course, there is a lot that could be unpacked here, but for the sake of time, let's go to the late 1950s. A Hutu revolution deposed the ruling Tutsi king on the grounds that many Hutus had been marginalized. And over the next years, thousands of Tutsis were killed and others fled to the neighboring countries. As you have many refugees in the neighboring countries, they formed the Rwanda Patriotic Front made out of refugees. And in 1990, they invaded the country on the grounds that they had the right to not to remain stateless. They wanted to come back and also contribute to their home, to their country. And as they invaded the country, the Tutsis within Rwanda were scapegoated or considered as threats. So the genocide then, 4 years later, was a result of an extremist Hutu elite, not all Hutus, to make it clear, deliberately fostering hatred and fear of the Tutsi population. And this fueled by the intensive propaganda through the Radio Television Libre de Mircorin and the journals like Kangura and the national radio. So the media played a big role. The silence of many church authorities was appalling, and then the indifference of the international community. There were a few voices definitely that spoke out, like the Bishop Nsengiyumva Vatade in one of his letters prior to the genocide. For more, I would invite you to read these books. This is one of on the left, you have my co-edited book by Georgetown University Press. It is coming out this month. And it's a wonderful book with several and eminent scholars. So we have been working on this book and it's one of its kind. I also published a book recently, Risen from the Ashes, Theology as Autobiography in Post-Genocide Rwanda, and I will recommend chapter 2 because it deals succinctly on the history of Rwanda and why we ended up with a genocide. Let me put it clear, this is not for self-promotion. I want to make, this may help for people to know more. So where does the church fit in all this? How could the church fail to give strong and clear disapproval of the genocide considering that the country was highly Christian, about 80% of the population. This includes Protestant and Catholics. And the killings mostly took place in churches and the Catholic buildings, while some church ministers were implicated in some of the massacres. Some of these church leaders have been tried at the International Court. Did theology fail to remember the concrete moral significance of the incarnation? That the word became flesh, gave value to the body, and so the body should not be desacralized. How could people forget that he who crushes the human person, whatever he or she is, cannot respect God? How can we use the suffering endured by Rwandans as lessons for our wounded world? And I think as really there is a lot one can say on the church. I would invite you, I have a book coming out from Brill on the role of the church in Rwanda's tragic history. But to sum it up, really at the heart of the church's involvement, or for lack of better word, of complicity in Rwanda's history, it's a church that became captive from its beginnings to a bourgeois and class sensibilities. A church that often danced on the tune of whoever was in power without challenging it. A church marked by concern for respectability, for mass conversion. Let's convert the king, then the whole population will follow, without serious encounter with Christ and change from within. A church that was interested with material success and authoritarianism, and if you like, mere orthodoxy with a weak and facile understanding of the God of Jesus Christ and lip service to his gospel. Each of these points can contribute a chapter to a book on the Church of Rwanda. But as I sum up what was really at the heart of the church's failure, I look at this concern to be respected rather than being a church wounded with the wounded. The concern for mass, for statistics, for so many people are converted who are the mass conversion, but not necessarily deeply with deep conversion. Then, of course, a mere orthodoxy. A lot could be said here. A bourgeois church that was not a poor church with the poor, especially either before before independence or even after independence. So that's partly how one can look at the involvement and the failure of the church. In the interest of time, so why have I called this topic that the Church of Rwanda is a mirror? As you know, at the heart of a mirror is that it helps us to look at our own appearance. So I'm not speaking of the Church of Rwanda or even of Rwanda so that I invite people for pity. Far from it. It's rather that we may re-examine ourselves. So I'm putting a mirror to us and see how our own humanity has failed too. And this is not just some form of fallacy ad hominem. It's a fact that if the church in Rwanda has failed, we can find this in other places too. And so I put it this way. Perhaps some observers and scholars tend to blame the genocide on the Rwandan punishment for conformism, for obedience, or uncritical respect for hierarchy and authority, and centuries of class, contested categories, as I call them, tribal and putative racial differences, but doing so does not take history seriously. The first genocide in the modern world was the almost complete eradication of the Native Americans by European settlers. And I'm glad this was mentioned at the beginning of this lecture by John. From 1904 to 1908, the German colonialists wiped out the Herero tribe in present Namibia, killing some 65,000 people. From 1915 to 1918, the Ottoman Empire killed or deposed all the Armenians from their territories. Regrettably, this hasn't yet been officially acknowledged as a genocide. And as many as 1.5 million people were killed. And from 1938 to 1945, at least 6 million Jews and many others, gypsies, were killed. So Rwanda is not unique. And of course, this is not to say it with a lot of joy, but it's rather an invitation to examine our humanity, what humanity is capable of doing. And since I'm speaking to an American audience, or many people from who are Americans, we may also ask why many Native Americans are not thankful for Thanksgiving. At the heart of Christianity, having said all this, my point is not to point fingers that others have done it too. I'm not here for an ad hominem fallacy. I'm not even here to make exculpatory justification for what happened in Rwanda. These tragedies underscore just how Christianity without a consequence, so a Christianity which doesn't make a difference, is a problem that Rwandans and Westerners and others share. Any expression of Christianity that fails to challenge any or all forms of expression of idolatry is not Christianity at all. Forms of idolatry, we can fit many things here. We can put tribalism, we can put ethnicity, we can put racism. So a lot can be fit in these forms of idolatry, where one worships himself or herself. The lesson then is this. And given the fact what happened in Rwanda and how Rwanda was abandoned during the genocide, again, an invitation to read more, especially I would invite you to read on how Rwandans were left to their own fate. What we learn from Rwanda is that politically and economically, Rwanda's history offers a terrain to understand why the love of friendship in political terms rests upon the equality of partners. In political and economic partnerships, one helps the other because there are benefits attached, or because one thinks the other partner will reciprocate in some way. If you like, it is a quid pro quo relationship. This may explain why Western nations pulled out of Rwanda when Rwandans needed them most. Rwanda offered no equal partnership. I would invite you to watch some of the movies. If you like, watch Hotel Rwanda, watch sometimes in April, they will give you vividly this image. And Ugandan theologian Emmanuel Katongore, who has extensively written on Rwanda, says this: despite the rhetoric of all the people being equal and deserving the same protection, it seems the lives of a few Westerners were worth more than those of 800,000 Rwandans who were killed. And he adds, the United States' interest in Rwanda simply did not seem worth the risk of American soldiers. And of course, this is not to sing out only America. I think at the heart of what Emmanuel Katongore, this Ugandan theologian, want to say is that relationships that are based on economic partnership will not often valorize the human person, especially when risks are involved. The purpose is not to point fingers, but first to strongly underscore the non-assistance to innocent people in danger of extermination, regardless of the position of the genocidal regime, that is the regime that planned and executed the genocide, or the Rwandan Patriotic Front, so the rebel group that was formed by many refugees to return home. Or second, to explain why we need to go back to re-examine the way of Jesus, which is a way of inclusive love, which names us all as daughters and sons of God. And the way of Jesus goes beyond economic and political partnership. The way of Jesus helps us to challenge shallow commitments. The way of Jesus teaches us to make room so that others may live, especially those at the margins. It calls for sacrifice. And I think this is really, globally speaking, this is where theology failed in Rwanda. When some countries can make themselves feel good about the virtue of offering relief to others, they will do it. But when help calls for sacrifice, as it did in 1994, the West seems to prefer sacrificing Africa to putting any of its own resources or people at risk. And we can see this as part also in some way as part of the failure of the United Nations. So what does this mean for Christians, for all of us, or more broadly for humanity, since I know I may not be speaking only to Christians? Following the footstep of Christ, who is really the image of what it means to be human. Following in the footstep of Christ entails having a heart as large as the world. And I bet that is challenging. To enlarge our hearts, we need to start to grasp the interconnectedness of our lives. Wherever we are located, we all share common vulnerabilities. We can recall the African concept of Ubuntu, shared humanity, or if you like, the web of interconnected relationships. A follower of Christ is not one who pretends to understand reality from a globalized, Christianized, or civilized spirit. A follower of Christ ought not to be lost in abstraction. He or she must ask what is lost when one concentrates on abstraction, ignoring what is concrete. At the heart of all this is say, in places where people have suffered so much, one cannot be content with abstract theology. It has to be concrete. Those of us who gather around the table of fellowship with Christ and yet engage consistently in the works of darkness are meant to see ourselves in the betrayer. And probably a beautiful quotation at this time of Holy Week. So there is a challenge to us in what it means to be a Christian in places where people are wounded. Theology is not done in a vacuum. It is contextual. And this is confirmed by Johann Baptist Metz, the German theologian, the political theologian, who after the Second World War and after the experience of Auschwitz, he felt theology could not remain the same. He could not do theology with his back turned to Auschwitz. He contends that looking at Auschwitz, it became clear that an adequate separation between systematic theology and historical theology, between truth and history, is not possible. And so if you look at the poster that we received from the university, I mentioned that we ought to remember Nyamata and Harama, two of the 6 churches that are now mentioned as memorial sites for thousands who were killed there. In Rwanda, we can't do theology ignoring these locations. There is a universal import from contextual theologies. They have something to teach the rest of humanity. And in fact, I would borrow these words from a Boston College theologian who says that theology that stress social location do reach towards the universal, but always in and through particular expressions in relation to other particular expressions. So for anyone who thinks that contextual theologies are actually minimal or not relevant at all, you probably will need to go back and redefine our way of our theology. Genuine Christian life goes beyond what one might get out of equal partnership. And Pope Benedict, the late Pope Benedict XVI, offers a theological analysis of what one discovers in the parable of the Good Samaritan, something that was missed in Rwanda. Or at least there were some good Samaritans, but broadly speaking, this could have enhanced what Pope Francis says could have enhanced our living together and our help to those in need. The Samaritan does not ask how far his obligations of solidarity extend, nor does he ask about the merits required for eternal life. He is not lost in those abstractions. Something else happens. His heart is wrenched open. Seeing this man the wounded man in such a state is a blow that strikes him viscerally, touching his soul. He had compassion, struck in his own soul by the lighting flash of mercy. He himself now becomes a neighbor, heedless of any question or danger. For those who are not Christians, the story of the Good Samaritan, you can read it in the Bible, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 25 onwards, just to give to orient those who may not be Christians. And the issue there for that, the story of the Good Samaritan, is that it's no longer which the other person is a neighbor to me or not. The question is about me. I have become the neighbor, and when I do, the other person counts me as myself. If we had done this in Rwanda, we would be celebrating so many heroes. The Samaritan does not present a theological expose of neighborliness lost in abstraction. Rather, he acts. He actually shows what it means to love. The definition that Thomas Aquinas gives of love is willing the good of the other and doing something concrete about it. And the other doesn't have necessarily to be someone from my family, just because the person is created in the image of God. Will the good of that person and do something concrete about it. The Samaritan demonstrates what theologically is named graced and shared humanity. The man becomes a neighbor because he understands that the other person counts as himself. It is not unreasonable to say that the recognition of our shared humanity must push us to reimagine how we might learn to be a neighbor deep within, to become like someone in love, someone whose heart is open to being shaken up by another's need. Yet, while it is good to be a good Samaritan, it is just as vital to ask and to work so that the conditions on the road of Jericho, where this Samaritan, this man was beaten, so that the conditions on that road can be improved, so that the next person who comes along won't be jammed by a band of robbers. So it's good to be a good Samaritan, but it is not enough. You have to improve the conditions so that people don't become just object of compassion. It is crucial to remember that at the heart of the 1994 genocide, when faced with the helplessness and dehumanization of Tutsi and moderate Hutu others, there were Hutus who risked their lives to rescue and protect those targeted by the genocidaire. There were also Samaritans in Rwanda, and we need to remember them. That's why I say remembering heroes. Those women and men must be held as the just of our nation and honored at Rwanda's memorial sites. On the journey towards reconciliation of memories in Rwanda, Rwandans would do well to pay heed to what Professor William O'Neill, an American who has written a lot on Rwanda, says. The memory born of testimony must account for the systemic distortions of supremacist ideology, yet refuse to essentialize victim and perpetrator. So Rwanda offers a lesson, and I guess we can extend this to many other places where people have suffered. Theologically, Rwanda's past is a laboratory for failed agape, true love. And for Pope Benedict, he puts it beautifully, agape goes beyond all political alignments governed as they are by the principle of I give so that you will give. Do ut des. And that displays its supernatural character. Agape, which means the love that doesn't expect anything in return, it links us to a new way of being and acting rooted in God who acts without seeking God's own interest. I'm trying to imagine what this may mean in places where there is racism. Agape rests on the fact that deep within, I am already becoming a brother or a sister to those I meet who are in need of my help. The lesson then is clear. Relationships based on political and economic alliances are unlikely to be moved by another's need. Or even if they do, it will be transient, it won't last. While those founded on theological agape are shaken and shaped by another's need. And so here we see the transcendence, if you like, of theology beyond other fields. One does not only find a neighbor, one is also found by the neighbor, or rather one becomes the neighbor. Therefore, Christian mission is not primarily about development services, good as this may be. It is primarily about the transformation of people's identities, challenging all those biases. If I were to use Bernard Lonergan, he has beautiful writings on biases, personal, egoistic, ethnic, group. I would invite you to read Method in Theology. So at the heart of Christian mission is a transformation from within. Now, within the context of Rwanda, just to proceed, really we have come to realize, or at least I have come to realize, that a theology that matters should start from wounds. Any discourse on Rwanda, in post-genocide Rwanda, and its aftermath and the war, and in a world of violence, to put it more broadly, must start from the wounds of denial of self, of denial of the other, of being fixated in some form of moral equivalence, desiring to equate the war and the genocide, validating the inextricable link between theological discourse and people's context. If theology is to assist the church in reconciling Rwandans, it must free itself from captivity to a church that has been shaped almost from its Rwandan beginnings by a bourgeois and class sensibilities, and is marked by concern for respectability, material success, authoritarianism, mere orthodoxy, weak or facile understanding of the God of Jesus Christ. So my envisioning of theology, it has to transcend being confined to particular ideologies or groups. And so should be ecclesiology as well. If theology is to assist the church in reconciling Rwandans, it must rethink itself in the current broken and scared Rwandan bodies. We can expand this to several other places where people have suffered and continue to suffer, and where also their wounds haven't been exposed. Theology must reimagine humanity, must still remain in the church and society in the light of the memory of the passion and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Here, Johann Baptist Metz, the German theologian, will be a great thing here, a great author. Theology in Rwanda has to start from the African context. It has to evangelize culture, if you like. Now, as we proceed, maybe just to give, here is an image of a church that was leveled to the ground and people are killed inside the church. This is in the western part of Rwanda, in Nyange, where a priest and a businessman asked for some militias to come, and actually they bulldozed the church building and people died inside. A priest, regrettably, and many others. So in places like Nyange, how do you do theology? How do you heal people's wounds? Rwanda, to proceed to another layer of my presentation, Rwanda has had multi-layered wounds. It doesn't only have one wound. And here I'm only giving a few. A list could go on. And unfortunately, this is a description. In my book from Greer, that is coming out of Greer, I go much deeper into this. A wound, of course, is an injury, especially one in which the skin or another external surface is torn, pierced, cut, or otherwise broken. A wound also can be an injury to the feelings or to one's being as a whole, to one's identity. A wound can be experienced when the values that hold people together are torn apart. So a wound is not just physical. Within Rwanda, the fabric of the Rwandan society was torn by those who are committed to kill, not only because of fear, abuse of power, the greed for resources, negative ethnicity, hatred of the other, but also because the Rwandan society had sunk into violence and some Rwandans felt no moral obligation to be each other's keeper or to care for the most vulnerable. Even the elderly women were raped. Even some pregnant women were asked to abort because people thought they were pregnant of Tutsi kids. The tragedy of the war, the killing of nearly 1 million Tutsi, and the massive flow of the Rwandan refugees into the Democratic Republic of Congo and other neighboring countries left countless suffering and wounds. And I have come to discover this now as a priest, as I listen to many people. It enlarges your horizon. Actually, experiencing God doesn't diminish you, it widens you. You listen to people's wounds, to people's challenges, and your view. I see it, especially as people come and confide their pains to me, and your own life is expanded. Here is the image I will use in Rwanda. It's an image that it's a caption I took from Czech Republic at the memorial of the victims of communism. I was there some 7 months ago. And you can see the image here. You see a man who looks modest, okay, but you see also many broken people. And as you climb the stairs, if some of you have ever been there, this is at Prague, you will see that people are disappearing, become invisible. In a sense, in Rwanda, there are people who have become invisible. There also are people who look physically okay, but interiorly they are wounded. Many wounds in Rwanda stem from the desecration of bodies. One of the lasting wounds of Rwanda's history is that Rwanda has become a landscape of bodies treated as disposable for years. Women have been humiliated, abused, raped, and killed. Tutsi women were perceived as threats, and this stemmed partly from the mythology that they reproduced an alien other. I will invite you to read Jay Carney's book, especially when he speaks about the 10 Hutu commandments. And the first 3 are on women, the Tutsi women, and how they should be treated because they reproduce an alien other. Rape carries social stigma. So many women who are raped either during the war or during the genocide, sometimes fear revealing the truth of what happened because of fear of not finding out a husband, or the rejection of families, or the fear of reprisal of many of those who raped them who are still meandering around, or just the survivor's guilt. And I am for my MBA dissertation, I'm actually working on the leadership of women after the genocide. You will discover so much here. Former refugees who returned to Rwanda after many years of exile also carry unreconciled memories. This is quite a huge terminology. These unreconciled memories can be unpacked to mean many things. It will mean also include children of mixed ethnic identities, sometimes who don't know where they belong, or sometimes choose because of a lot of intensified social medias. So the ability to choose and to forge one's own identity. I will invite you to read the book of Uwineza, Say You Are One of Them. He has a beautiful chapter there where he really looks at the children of mixed identity and the challenges they had after the war and the genocide. The genocidaires, those who pre-planned, executed the genocide, and those who were released from prisons experience conflicting receptions, and studies need to be conducted in order to learn sufficiently the process perpetrators must undertake in order to disengage from doing harm and to be reintegrated into their communities. At the heart of this, there has to be a theology of mercy. People cannot be reduced to their past crimes. Those who lost their relatives during the war between the then Rwandan government and the Rwandan Patriotic Front also hold unreconciled memories. Justice ought to continue pursuing those who committed crimes prior to, during, or after the genocide, while, of course, trying to getting to the grips of the truth. Parents of children who joined the Rwandan Patriotic Front, they saw the army that stopped the genocide. And as the rising violence deepened, some of these parents have never seen their children back. They died on the battlefield. They too carry wounds, and we often forget them. Think of the poignant memory of betrayal whenever Rwandans think of the multiple bystanders who saw the genocide unfolding and either kept quiet or abandoned the Rwandans altogether. This is another wound, a spiritual wound. So as I move now towards the end, what is the proposal? I offer some 5 perspectives here, and I will do so very quickly. I have a sincere engagement with history, as you noticed, and you can see even this joining Johann Baptist Metz, that theology that really matters in Rwanda cannot be divorced from history. The need for a prophetic church beyond superficial Christianity. And this is where we also need to evangelize culture and identities or people's allegiances. Rebuilding the trust that was broken, the need for a theology of liberation that consults all the victims of history, then solidaristic memory based on truth and mercy. Let me go briefly over each. If this unfortunate history is to provide lessons for the world and for Rwanda and for the African continent and for the universal church, it should engage sincerely with the tragic history of Rwanda. The fact that a seemingly vibrant, predominantly and conspicuously Christian and indeed Catholic community could be involved in such gruesome events that left so many people killed and others as refugees, if we don't take history seriously, it will haunt us again. So we should ask questions: to what extent were some of the motivations and methods of evangelization in Rwanda, to what extent were they not helpful? And for the present, what pedagogical and categetical models are more faithful to the core of the gospel? My late beloved Professor Laurent Magesa, in one of his articles on Rwanda, he says, Rwanda has to develop a Rwandan catechism. Then if we take quickly the need for a prophetic church, our church should play a prophetic role to bring our people to greater coherence between cultic practices, devotions, prayers, and the daily living and observance of God's words and commandments. If we take seriously the challenges of Rwanda today, and especially the challenges of rebuilding trust in our churches and our communities, we should develop a mysticism of open eyes. And what this means is to allow those who have been made invisible to become visible, is to allow the dry bones of Rwanda to be buried, is to pay attention to the responsibilities we have in rebuilding trust by accepting the vulnerability and the position of weakness for a church that was not prophetic enough. And then if we were to think of the rebuilding of trust that was tragically wounded, this is an enormous task. It requires bold gestures that prove a sense of both reality and transcendence. Ultimately, a new way of acting and being is required. And I'm glad the bishops of Rwanda have been trying, especially with the synod that we have had just before the year 2000. This synod allowed people to come together and to speak. And as survivors or bystanders came together, many people discovered that all of us carry wounds. And from that position of vulnerability, some trust is born. A lot of work is certainly need to be done. And in the current synod on synodality, with that Pope Francis has put forth, I am so impressed by how many people have been able to share, to journey together, to share their wounds. Then once one person shares their story of how they lived in Congo, another person shares the story of how they almost died during the genocide, and we come to realize that our wounds begin to heal one another. I could develop more on this, but I think to build the trust, we also have to deal with the colonial history. If you don't deal with this history and deal with also the issue of the international community that abandoned Rwanda, I think we still need to, we will be building on sand. Some people need to be held accountable. There is a need for the theology of liberation. The apparent failure of the churches and the theologians to condemn ethnic discrimination that led to genocide against the Tutsi, and there's so many people who died. And as Maria Guria has written in his book, this calls for an urgent task to construct a theology of liberation that allows the victims of history to speak. Theologians working alongside indigenous people around the globe face similar questions in confrontation with the memory of mass extermination of millions of children, women, and men that have taken and continue to take place in every continent. To have a theology of liberation, we have to consult the victims of history. And they will show us our real face. And then finally, solidaristic memory, to remember the wrongs committed against others, individuals or groups, risks responsibility. The risk of taking collective responsibility for past wrongs remains a daunting task and cannot be undertaken lightly or half-heartedly. While taking collective responsibility for past wrongs cannot undo the harm or minimize the gravity, undertaking such action is worthy doing. Not doing it is more costly because it helps us to invest the wrongdoing with a different meaning. It helps us to broaden our categories, and also the categories of victims, to allow silent voices that are yet to emerge to come forth. I will excuse myself, I could go on each of these, but I'm developing them in my book. And towards conclusion, certainly, at the heart of Christian life is a message of hope. That's what we celebrate in Easter. And I end with this beautiful quotation in a movie which some of you probably have seen, or I will invite you to watch, The Shawshank Redemption. And one major character, Andy Dufresne, tells Red, another character, after they have suffered so much in prison and they had hoped that there would be good things to come, then Andy says, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. In the midst of suffering of our world and divided world, and of course, of the wounds of Rwanda, multi-layered wounds, there is still hope. And we can quote here Jeremiah, who says, speaking on behalf of Yahweh, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm, plans to give you hope and a future. This is at the heart, otherwise at the heart of our ministry. Otherwise, after what we had in Rwanda, we would have given up. Of course, there is a mission of forgiveness that sets us free. And this is where you probably will give a short story of my life. In 2003, I met a killer of my siblings. He had been released from jail, and where I had actually had him jailed. And after he had confessed publicly that he killed, public to the government, I had just finished the Jesuit novitiate, and he came towards me, and then he asked me to forgive him. it was like a movie. I wasn't sure whether he meant it, whether it was safe, but forgiveness is a miracle, and it helps, how do I say? It helps you to remember the injury differently. By whatever force, energy, which I can't describe, I asked him to rise and we embraced. And when I finally, after a lot of struggle, when I finally told him, "Man Rarora, I forgive you," I felt free. And that has set me on a long journey. This is why this topic has become so crucial for my life. You can read this in my book, which I published a few months ago, Risen from the Ashes. Go to chapter 3 and 4, you will be moved. At the heart of this ministry, of course, is a ministry of hope. Many of you have cars and you drive, and when you compare how the times you look at the side mirror and the windshield, you look at the side mirror to remind you where you have passed, and also the danger of driving with other drivers. But you fix your eyes so much on the windshield, on the destination, with the hope that you will get there. So in the midst of so many challenges of our church, so many people have been wounded, we can still remain the windshield of hope for many people. We are living in a world where there are so many ideological camps. And I want to borrow this as I conclude from Pope Francis. And he says this: in the midst of so many ideological allegiances, we have to remember that the gospel is an announcement that touches the heart and changes us. If you use the gospel to an ideology of the right and the left or the center, you are making the gospel into a political party, like an ideology or a club. You may want to review your understanding of the gospel. The gospel gives us the freedom of the Spirit, which acts and helps us to go further still. It is necessary today to take the gospel and to implore the Spirit to help us advance in the right way. Living in a church where people have often taken ideological camps of left and right and center, maybe this is something to come back to, a lesson for the world. Also, it's an invitation to be a church that listens. And I think this is really beautiful in the current synod on synodality. And finally, again, to borrow from one of my esteemed scholar and wonderful speaker, this is Chris Loney. In one of his presentations recently to our college, he says we have to be a church with dusty shoes, a church that is deeply pastoral, to be closer to our people. And I quote him, and here he's looking at Pope Francis. It has been the core of Pope Francis' vision to be deeply pastoral. When Chris Loney researched his recent book, Francis, Why He Leads the Way He Leads, he was deeply moved by an anecdote told by a Jesuit priest, who then, as a young Jesuit scholastic, volunteered to help Bergoglio launch a new parish in an impoverished shanty town in Buenos Aires. Francis' instruction to his seminarian volunteers was simple: walk the barrio in which the new parish was located, meet the people, connect with them. The punchline of the anecdote is that Bergoglio, now Francis, would stand at the residence late each afternoon as his young seminarians returned from their outreach, and he would simply look down at their feet as they struggled home, And then he saw who has dusty shoes. Those are the ones who are doing what the church needs. My friends, you have been listening to me for many minutes. In our church today, not only for Rwanda, the church needs people with dusty shoes, with courage, people who don't quit, with a ministry of proximity to God's people, especially to those who are wounded. And as I conclude, pondering the experiences of the wounds and the scars that Rwanda has borne, it becomes clear, at least to me, that we are all of us products of our culture, natural or social surroundings, histories, education, familial or societal experiences, And ultimately, we are defined by our orientation towards God, to quote Karl Rahner. This helps us define but do not determine who we are or who we become. So don't reduce Rwandans to the genocide. A theology that might spring from the wounds of Rwanda is not to engender pity for that small hilly country in Central East Africa. Instead, what I hope to have achieved in this is to assist us and humanity to understand that, at least in part, we are who we are and how our various conditions and circumstances influence or even shape the choices we make, and the renewal of ecclesial imagination and the need to build a credible, authentic, and dirty shoes church. Ultimately, Rwanda is a mirror to and for humanity. Maybe a question for a reflection. Since I am Ignatian, I bring to mind experiences of wounds and suffering that I have seen around me, some of which I was involved in or I have caused, others of which I witnessed from the outside world. What contributed to the healing of these experiences? What were the challenges that were overcome? What do you consider as a hindrance to authentic Christianity and the interior transformation of people's identities? Think of it in your own context. Share your thoughts with your family, with your colleagues, and see what helps. Then finally, what will be your takeaway from this lecture? I thank you very much for your privileged attention.
Father Uwineza, we thank you for a very powerful discussion with us today. If I may be permitted to say, this is what theologians do, and this is what a priest does. So we are very grateful for your time and for your richness of faith, your richness of perspective. I'm not sure how many talks on the Rwandan genocide one could listen to and yet go away from empowered, feeling like there is a summons and there is a responsibility. And those are positive emotions, as you sort of touched on toward the end. Thank you so much. Those in the audience, we have received 3 questions. Thank you to Blake and Scott and Kevin. And Father Uwineza, you can see those, I think, on your screen. And thank you to Ron for submitting a 4th. We encourage any and all folks to speak up with courage and to offer any questions, any insights from your own context, whether these are in response to the questions our speaker just left us with, or other questions that you might have. We do have a preponderance of religious studies professors who have posed questions, so that is wonderful. And I would just reiterate to students, you are most welcome as well to enter this conversation. Father Marcel, can I turn it to you? You've got a range of questions here, very thoughtful. Would you like to take one of these
Sure, yeah. Once again, thank you very much for this invitation and really for your attention and for so many of you who have turned in. And I thank Blake, Rivera, then Scott, then Kevin. Actually, I think I know Kevin from Boston. Let me briefly touch on their questions. How has the Rwandan genocide influenced the approach of Catholics towards interreligious dialogue and the importance of fostering peaceful coexistence among different faith communities? Wonderful question, and I think this is an area I haven't touched on, probably for future. I think Blake, if you allow me to use your first name, soon after the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, the different interfaith communities and actually mainline Protestant churches were the first to come out, really to regret what happened and to bring communities together to start a journey of reconciliation. One of the pastors was key here. I can name Father Ibarde Rugirangoga, who has been a champion of bringing together different faith leaders. And also because of his forgiving the people who have killed his family, he became a credible witness. So he was able to galvanize church leaders from across different Christian denominations to come together. I am also thinking of one of the Jesuit fathers, Father Ugirashebuja, who soon after the genocide was also able to come together with other church leaders to provide solutions to many refugees, particularly to many refugees who either were within internally displaced, or also those who were coming back, but they needed to be reintegrated in the community. And of course, at the heart of the synod on synodality, the synod rather prior to the Jubilee of 2000, there were many bishops who invited other faith leaders to see how we can move together. I would like to single out the Muslim community. Probably they don't get the credit they deserve. Many faith Muslim community leaders actually opposed strongly the genocide and the killers. And we will find this in many books. You can read the book of Mahmoud Mamdan on Rwanda. And he really brings out the particular role of the Muslim community in sheltering victims of the genocide. Has it finished? It's a long journey. You know, it's very easy to destroy a country in 2 days or 1 month or 3 months, but it takes many years to rebuild hearts. So this is a process. It's not an event. So that's how I would answer your question. But there were many church leaders who came to the fore. If I go to how might the members of Gonzaga community nurture spirituality that embraces your 5 recommendations, what should we be looking at Gonzaga? I gave the 5 recommendations, and mindful that these are not exhaustive, but I'm thinking of being a prophetic church. Let's take just one example. I lived in America for 7 years, and please take me with nuance. I experienced a lot of racism in some way. And I think maybe not Gonzaga, but broadly speaking, in the United States, the issue of slavery, of racism still need to be tackled seriously. So how can the church, the people of God at Gonzaga deal with this issue seriously? Let me give a short anecdote, and a beautiful anecdote from the South. This is a church of St. Francis of the Sales. Soon after the Second Vatican Council, you know, they are moving altars. They used to have fixed altars on the wall because the priest would be having his back to the people. And now in that church, there was a lot of racism. So the blacks will sit behind and the white will sit up front. So after the Second Vatican Council, a new pastor comes in, a prophetic pastor. He involves the whole community to see how they can actually be together as a community of the people of God, going back to Lumen Gentium. And guess what? They dismantled the altar that was there. And then to build a new altar, they used the barricade that used to separate within the church the blacks and the whites. And they used that barricade to build a new altar. And when they were blessing that new altar, the pastor or the bishop who came, he says, the wood that you separate us is now a wood that brings us together as we celebrate the Eucharist. Prophetic in nature. So, and this is one example. Of course, we can think of other areas of life, the ways of inclusion. the ways of course, not really falling into ideological camps that I have seen a lot in America. We have that here as well. We can think of course, the wounds that have been caused by the clergy sex abuse. So how do you heal those wounds? I think that's an area where I cannot give universal answers, but there is a core there, a core to authenticity, if you like, breaking down the biases. And the bias, according to Lonegan, is a distortion to intellectual development. You fix people in some categories, and you think they will never come out of it. Yet you actually realize you are the one who is fixed in that box. So it's an area where we need to grow out of our own prejudices. I don't know whether that's satisfactory, but I'm being quick here. Let me go to Kevin Brown. Father Marcel, it is wonderful to see you again. Thank you very much for sharing the story of local church and the constructive theological proposal with Gonzaga today. Your proposals are essential for all theologies of the church in a broken church. I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about the need for a prophetic church. What reforms might be needed within the lives, local churches that might allow for it to be? Thank you very much, Kevin Brown, and good to see you, to read you again. I remember our journeys together at Boston College as doctoral candidates. So wonderful to see that you are at Gonzaga. Please welcome to Nairobi, to Hekima. Kevin, I think I touched on this on being a prophetic church, but if I could add one particular point to being a prophetic church, what would that be? Is that image of dusty shoes? Remember the image? I can send you that quotation from Chris Loney. A church that is not caught up in the ideological camps of Democrats and Republicans and centrists, you name it. Really, a church of Jesus Christ. And he takes no sides. Let me give an example. As I'm a priest, I used to celebrate Mass in one parish in Boston. And one particular Sunday after the election of Trump, there was this, I should be careful here. There was, we had celebrated Mass, and during the prayer of the faithful, one person raised their voice and said, really tarnishing, should I say, those who had been elected. It caused commotion, and I could see that within the church, and mindful that in the church, there were not only Democrats or Republicans. The church is for everyone. So as a priest, I was wondering, how do I bring people together? And I felt maybe saying it immediately after that prayer would have caused more commotion. So in discernment, we proceeded with the Mass. But then towards the end of the Mass, before the final blessing, I asked people to sit down. And then I said, look, when we come here, a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or a centrist has a place, a home here. The politics of Jesus are politics of inclusion. No, everyone is welcome. If you like, if you were to summarize, part of the gospel is the word welcome, the hospitality of God. You can read one theologian who has written a book on the hospitality of God from the Gospel of Luke. So, Kevin, this is what I will invite you. Really to challenge this, the gospel does not hold camps. And I think there is a lot that we can learn from there. And with all due respect, even our many Episcopal conferences fall prey of this. And let me go to Ron. Were there any arrest of trials of perpetrators of the genocide? Also, was there a Truth and Reconciliation Commission established similar to what happened in South Africa? Thank you very much, Ron Large. As you remember, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, I said there were, I only had 1 hour presentation. There is only so much you can do. But I will invite you to read more and to read on my book. Sure, there were many perpetrators who were held accountable. And even the United Nations set an international tribunal court to try those who are killed, to try those who, especially the masterminders of the genocide. That was at The Hague. No, that was in Arusha. Then it has now been moved to The Hague. And you know, one of the sponsors of the genocide was Kabuga Felicien, who has now been caught after several years. He's now being tried at The Hague. And for sure, there were something similar to the Truth and Justice Commission, TRC of South Africa. We called it Gachacha. Gachacha means grass. People sat on the grass to speak the truth of what happened. I'm mindful that there were limitations to Gachacha, but they helped people to at least know what happened. So that's, let me invite you to read more on this, but there were Truth and Justice Commission, which we called Gachacha. And this was also to deal with so many prisoners, inmates, overcrowded in prisons. There were more than 120,000 inmates tried for the genocide for prisons that were made for 4,500, overcrowded. But you also have to move on. This was costly financially. So the country devised this local justice mechanism we called Gachacha. Then Itohan Idumonyi, thank you for the well-articulated paper. I appreciate how you started with the story of the woman who challenged you to follow this path. I'm wondering how you have taken this contextual theology back to help her to understand how the church can be done differently in a way that will support human flourishing. Thank you very much, Tohan. And let me confess, the quotation I gave was from a bishop, and I am not a bishop, and I don't even desire to be one. I think what I can say, what have I done? Since I'm an academician, I have galvanized people really to reflect on these issues. So the book that is coming out of Georgetown University, let me see if I can just put it out. It's one of the biggest contribution to this discussion. And of course, a book, as you know, a book contributes to not only to present generations, but also for the future. This is the book. I must confess, a very expensive book, but in the book you have really quite eminent contributors. And so with these contributors, I think our contribution will be shared by so many people, and we hope also to disseminate it to the local level. We hope to launch it in June, and really bring it to ordinary people. And of course, we had a conference where we invited many people, and this allowed many people to talk. But if I should, and let me share this with humility, there have been many people who died in Rwanda, but there have also been people we are yet to know how they died. And some of their kids have not had good education. I am a keen believer in education. So what we have done, especially when I was in the United States, we started a scholarship for poor kids, which we called Misericordia. Believe me, when I meet these kids, some of them are now at the university, some of them are even doing medical school, and see how their lives have been transformed. Mind you, these are not just kids of the survivors these are not Tutsi kids, everyone who wants to study. For me, this is a way of contributing or enlarging the vision or dignifying people. So that's how I would answer. I could say more. I hope John can share my email with you, so I'm happy to follow up. Your talk was amazing, and I thank you so much for speaking to us about such a difficult yet important topic. How can we use religion and religious figures to explain forgiveness and hope to those who are staunchly against religion? Let me thank you very much, Sadi, for your question. Let me say, since you are in the United States, if you take up the book of Oscar Romero, now a saint, who had been strongly opposed, but now he has become canonized. That would be a good example of someone who can inspire you. And remember, he had a shift. Initially, he was aligned with the government. But all of a sudden, when he saw the suffering of his people, he said, I can't continue. So take up the book, one of the books on Oscar Romero, or some of his homilies. That would be one good example. But let me take also one example from Rwanda. There's a sister, her name is Félicité Niyitegeka, who at the heart of the genocide, when many of our families were being killed, she refused to give up, and she accepted to die with the people who are being killed, even though she was of the opposite tribe that was not to be killed, as if anyone was to be killed anyway. And now she has become a heroine. Her name is Félicité Niyitegeka. If you take up my book, this is the, let me see if I can pull it out. My book will give you, I think I mention her a lot because she's quite inspiring. Risen from the Ashes, Theology as Autobiography. The book is on Kindle, is cheap because it was heavily subsidized. So I can tell you, if you read the book, you will be moved. Thank you very much. Let me move on to Aderit Rukomangana. Thank you very much, Aderit. I think I know you. The question that you have, how are the church leaders recognizing Christian Hutus and Tutsis who sacrificed themselves during the genocide against the Tutsi? Adelit, thank you very much. And I think you and I will share this. They have been a lot of, should I say, we have now a process underway to see how Cyprien Rugamba can be canonized with his family. And then, of course, Félicité Niyitegeka, who sheltered Tutsis and was killed even at the order of those of his brother, who's a high-ranking military officer. There is Father Jean Bosco from Kibungo, whose name is coming up. So many others. I think we need to bring up these voices because Rwanda has had sense. We could discuss much more on this, but I think there is more that could be done to bring up these voices. There is another, what would your opinion or advice to academicians, especially those who teach history, addressing the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi as a civil war? Amisa, thank you very much for this question. And this is critical in an era where there are several genocide deniers. One of the last stages of a genocide is actually its denial. And this cuts across, you can take this even to the Jews who are, if I have had the privilege to visit Auschwitz, I think it's a double tragedy to deny what happened, and facts speak for themselves. And so theologians, we need, remember, to seek the truth. Pope Benedict says, as he introduces his book, Jesus of Nazareth, that certainly it's difficult to dig wholeheartedly or fully the past, but some hypotheses enjoy more certainty than others. So it's crucial for a theologian really to be grounded in history. And actually, what does the incarnation do? It grounds us in history. And I think we can borrow this from Johann Baptist Metz in areas of conflicts and areas where people have suffered. There is a historical theology is not possible. For me, a good theologian has to be grounded in history. We can even see this more broadly, how some of the eminent theologians we admire have a good understanding of the patristic fathers. So that helps us to realize that we are a 2,000-year tradition. We are not just only looking in front of our nose. So going back to history and digging it up, knowing that it has its own limitations is key. That's my invitation to theologians. But at the same time, for theologians to know that this is a vocation. We are not at the mercy of a bishop. We are not at the mercy of so-and-so. We have received this as a vocation. And of course, we have to work within the community called church. But we are not, and this is an invitation in case any bishop or others may be listening to me. It's not to stifle the spirit within theologians. And if it is of God, remember, it will last. Right now, the French Episcopal Conference is putting up a case for Henry de Lubac. You remember he had been silenced in the 1950s. And now his case is up for canonization. So don't give up. I don't mean everyone is going to be going that road, but history and the future know how to vindicate the people. So don't give up. And finally, thank you so much again for your presentation. A quick question, is that story encountering the killer of my siblings elaborated in your book, Risen from the Ashes? The answer is yes. You have that in chapter 4 of my book. And it's a moving story, and it touched someone recently, and someone was, he flew from Hawaii to come and see me, just as between us. Great, so you see it there. And I just said it in passing because I didn't want this lecture to be about me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Father Uwineza. With these words of yours, our Flannery lectures in Catholic theology for 2022 and 2023, this academic year, are now drawn to a close. We are extremely grateful for this time, this very early morning hour, this time that you spent with us. The topic is overwhelming, and the summons that you are offering, the summons to theologians, the summons to students, the summons to see, for anyone to see in their own context, ways in which Rwanda is a mirror to them. This is all highly productive. This is all toward our own responsibility, our cultivation of responsibility, truth-telling, and for Christians, living more deeply into that faith tradition. If you
allow me, let me thank you also once again. Really, John Shiveland, you wanted me to come to Gonzaga.
I did.
And unfortunately, travel limitations couldn't allow me. But I hope I didn't disappoint you, and I really want to thank all of you for your privileged attention and these wonderful questions. It showed that people paid attention and had interest. And my invitation, let us enlarge our hearts, really, that our hearts become as large as the world. And the rest is certainly in God's hands.